I'm going to quickly review just first class, what's the most important things we covered. We've got some notes handed out, because I was asked for that. I've got notes for the second class. The most important thing we learned in class 1 was how to pronounce Talbot County. I think. I mean, it's kind of like fingernails on a chalkboard when you hear Talbot, but we did go over that. But what did we do? We talked a little bit about our sources, the sources I used in my book that are significant. Primary sources, the War Rebellion, the Maryland State Archives. But we also talked about the advantages of technology, the ability to go in to one site and to immediately word search the volume, 129 volume set of the War Rebellion. You go into the Maryland Archives and actually look up their documents. 30 years ago, you had to make an appointment with the Maryland Archives. You go there, they brought the volumes out, you read, took some copies, now it's right there at your fingertips, you have it yourself. Digitized and searchable. Today, we can research circles around anyone who attempted to do it 30 years ago because of technology of what we have. And already, I'm not keeping up with our slide. So a little bit of sources. I mean, obviously, it's a Civil War. We talked about slavery, and the takeaway of slavery is, I want you to remember, is the Constitution protected slavery. And that Lincoln, actually, the first thing he did was put forward a constitutional amendment to protect slavery, that the federal government could not interfere with slavery that existed. And that was the very first act. I presented that because many people aren't familiar with the Civil War, believe that it was some epic battle of the North to go to abolish slavery, and it wasn't. It was not. Yes, the 7 cotton states seceded because they wanted to protect slavery. But Lincoln went to war because he wanted to protect the Union. He wanted to keep them in the Union. If the 7 cotton states had seceded for the price of tea in China, the war would have happened just the same. It was over a Union, at least until the Emancipation Proclamation in 1963, so the first 2 years of the war. We also saw how additional states seceded because they thought military coercion was unconstitutional. So we kind of went over that about how slavery played in. We talked about Maryland democracy and how, all right, we're not keeping up, and how Marylanders believed, and it was in their Constitution, all right, it was in the Maryland Constitution that they had just voted in 1851. It was in their first article in their Declaration of Rights. The people have the right to alter or change or abolish their government. The Maryland Constitution had a way to do that. But they believed that was a right to do so. Marylanders were strongly against the military coercion of the Southern states. And we saw that the sympathy with the Southern states was very much mistaken as a secession settlement. And I presented to you that article from the Baltimore Sun, the editorial explained just that. That the Northerners thought, because Marylanders were kind of saying, well, the Southerners, they have a right to have their own government. We think, then you're a secessionist. Okay, we saw with my research, now my thing's not keeping up, we saw that Maryland was mainly unionist. But there was 2 distinct types of unionists in Maryland. We had the unconditional unionists, who were considered loyal, who believed in union at all costs. War, go ahead, set aside the Constitution. Mr. Lincoln, we support you. But then we had the majority of the unions in Maryland, what is called constitutional unionists. And they didn't want the Southern states to leave. They certainly didn't want Maryland to secede, but they wanted the president to abide by the U.S. Constitution. And they thought it was unconstitutional to military coerce the states. They thought they wanted peace and not war. And that group of unionists were labeled Southern sympathizers, secessionists, even traitors. And so what happened in Maryland history, and historians who wrote it afterwards, it greatly exaggerated the secessionist movement in Maryland, because all these other secessionists, they didn't want Maryland to secede, but they labeled them as secessionists. And we saw examples of once you were labeled a secessionist or sympathetic, you were disloyal. You were disloyal to the president, and you were subject to arrest and imprisonment. A little bit on April 19th, a major event in U.S. history, the first bloodshed of the Civil War. The takeaway from that is both Baltimore's mayor and police chief attempted to protect those Union troops. They stood by them. The mayor marched with them. Marshal Kane put his men between the mob and the Union troops and told his men to shoot anyone that comes through our ranks. And then we had the killing of Robert Davis. That's after the riot was over, the Union troops were leaving Baltimore. Mr. Davis was oblivious to what had happened. He's on the train tracks, saw these Massachusetts militiamen. He cheered for Jeff Davis, and they killed him. They put their guns on the car and shot him. Question?
What were the troops doing? What was the purpose of the troops?
Okay. The purpose of the Northern troops passing through Baltimore was to go to respond to the president's call for the 75,000 troops to go into the southern states. So they responded to the call of Lincoln's proclamation. Let's leave questions at the end, okay? But that was
I'd like
the
to do them in
purpose.
the middle.
What's that?
I'd like to do them in the middle because we didn't have any time for questions at the end last time.
You're gonna have times. But yeah, but the purpose of the passing the troops was Lincoln called out for 75,000 to come down. They were some of the first troops. On the 18th, the first ones came and they were protected by the police. On the 19th, we had the riots. The important thing here is what the Baltimore people thought about these troops, what their intent was. And the people of Baltimore believed they were going down to oppress the South, declare war. Okay, so next one, we have Honest Abe Lincoln. After the riots on the 19th, the Maryland delegation met with Mr. Lincoln 3 times. 3 times with Lincoln. On the 21st, Mr. Lincoln and his staff, his cabinet says, these troops coming through Maryland have no hostile intent against Maryland. He assured the delegation that. And then a few days later, Lincoln instructs General Scott that if Maryland takes arms against the United States, that he wants to have General Scott to bombard your cities. On the 27th, the Maryland legislature published, they met on the 26th, they published the proclamation to the people of Maryland, with 3,000 copies published, that said, Maryland, we, as a legislative body, we have no authority to secede Maryland. We will not secede Maryland. And then we have the first suspension of habeas corpus. And then right after that, I think it's here. There we go. Let me back up. First suspension of habeas corpus. And then right after that, on the 28th, we see General Scott's orders, his first draft of his orders for the attack against the city of Baltimore. We saw the War Rebellion where Lincoln had authorized Secretary of War Simon Cameron to open the pathway through Baltimore. General Scott does his first draft. Patterson and Butler as the main commanders, updates the troops. Try to get Patterson to move on the 5th. Patterson refused to move, says he wasn't ready. New York Tribune caught wind of these orders somehow and published the orders about Baltimore to be attacked. And the New York Tribune exaggerated, said 100,000 troops are going to attack Baltimore and float every living thing down the Chesapeake. It's more like 15,000 troops that we had for that time. Maryland caught wind of it, and on the 6th of May, Maryland showed submission. How did they do that? They said, Union troops are free to come to Baltimore. 2, the Maryland militia, stand down. We saw right in the Baltimore Sun. Stand down, Maryland militia, General Trimble or Colonel Trimble at the time. Thank you for your service. The emergency's over. And the third thing that happened on May 6th was the governor took away General Tench Tillman's commission. Was the commander of the 2nd Division of the Maryland Militia, one of the largest units in Maryland. And Governor Hicks, we found, did that to many of the officers of the Maryland Militia, just to as part of the standing down militia. On the 7th of May, General Scott calls off the attack and tells his troops to move through administratively. And then we talked about Governor Hicks disarms Maryland. By the way, that attack against the city of Baltimore, that you have to go back to George Radcliffe in 1901. Historians didn't talk about it. It fell from our history. Okay, have anyone noticed the history that we learned, most of you might be a few years older than me, as children, and what we learn today? What we learn about what happened to American Indians as kids? Have we learned? We found there's a whole different story out there than what we were told. How about our Americans of African descent? Tulsa Massacre. We weren't told that. Is there a sanitization of our? Some people say whitewashing. That's kind of racial overtones. I like to say sanitization. Is someone sanitizing our American history? I don't know. If it is, it seems to be. And the same thing about the Civil War, because this whole attack against the city of Baltimore, that's huge. The president ordered an attack against the 4th largest city in the nation. That wasn't rebellion, and it held the largest free black population in the nation. He ordered it to be attacked. That is huge news, but it fell through the crack somehow. And by the way, that was the first blood of the Civil War, and 2 of the civilians killed were free black men. Marylanders took it as if the militia of Massachusetts had slaughtered civilians, and the people of Massachusetts took it as if the civilians of Baltimore slaughtered the Union troops. Now we see Governor Hicks almost immediately afterwards start coordinating with disarming Maryland. We saw the newspaper articles how the police commissioners of Baltimore turned in their guns to General Butler. We see how the guns and there's 2 other large armories in Maryland. One was in Frederick and one was here in Easton. And I kind of quickly went through that to run out of time, but Governor Hicks had all these arms turned in. There's another story here, by the way. Governor Hicks had met with President Lincoln more than one occasion very early on. And George Radcliffe documented that. Somehow Governor Hicks's personal papers somehow disappeared around the late 1800s. So we don't really know exactly what went on between President Lincoln and Governor Hicks. We do know that Governor Hicks was appointed a Union general after he left the office in Maryland. And later, because his health, he couldn't really work as a Union general, he was appointed as a U.S. Senator from Maryland. But anyway, Governor Hicks had the guns in the Frederick Armory turned over to unconditional Unionists, and the guns here in the Eastern Armory was turned over to the federal troops. And this is a story I hear, remember as a kid, my grandfather talked about how our armory was raided, and then Governor Hicks was part of it. And here's a newspaper article I found, and it had last time, but I didn't show it to you. Right from the Baltimore Sun, Easton, Maryland, the object of forays seized the arms of Easton Armory, which it did. And bottom, Colonel Smith said the arms were seized by order of Governor Hicks. Okay, so we're having disarmed in Maryland. After Baltimore is disarmed and a lot of the Maryland militia is disarmed, now we have the first arrest condition. The first one was Police Chief Kane in Baltimore. For 5 weeks, he had been protecting the Union forces. They arrested him in the middle of the night. And it's that very day, a provost marshal comes in and say, police commissioners, I am now in charge of Baltimore. I'm a federal provost. I am in charge. I'm a military man. And then the police commissioners of Baltimore started their protest to Congress. And on July 1st, they became imprisoned in the middle of the night. And I believe they started writing their protest before and they added to it once they got in prison. But anyway, they submitted their protest to Congress. And they said, this is a violation of our constitutional rights. There's no military authority to come in and take over Baltimore. We're being imprisoned without charges. Habeas corpus denied. It's said, blatant. If there's a crime against us, let's hear it. We'll gladly go to trial. Congress passed a resolution asking President Lincoln, what are the grounds for the arrest of these men? And Lincoln responded, because of public safety, I can't tell you. And that seems to be a common thing. And Congress accepted that. Just finishing up classroom review. Once the Baltimore police commissioners were, I think. Geez, I'm sorry, guys. There's that article. This is hard for me. There's an article about the Baltimore Sun, Easton Armory, by order of Governor Hicks, right here. That's something else historians would never report on, how Governor Hicks disarmed the state of Maryland. That's important. How do you succeed? You don't have any arms, any weapons. It's pretty hard to do that. That fell through the cracks also in Maryland history. And article, Governor Hicks is involved in this. All right, we've talked about the arrest of police commissioners and Lincoln refused for public safety. With the imprisonment of the Baltimore police commissioners, the federal provost marshal became in charge of the Baltimore police force. The federal provost marshal also became in charge of the Baltimore elections. And Baltimore accounted for 1/3 of all the votes in the state. And what else we find is that the Baltimore police force quits in protests, and they were replaced by unconditional unions chosen by the federal provost marshal. And they became known as the vice police. And we've also found that 120 of the Baltimore election judges quit on grounds of illegality. And they also were replaced by people chosen by the federal provost marshal. And the November elections was for the entire Maryland House of Delegates, half the Senate for governorship of Maryland. Those elections in November were extremely important. Now we're getting into class 2. We're talking about the Maryland State Legislature. They convened on April 26th. They met 3 times in 1861. They met first for about 3 weeks. Then they took a recess. They came back and they met for about another 3 weeks. And they rejoined back in late July and they met for 1 week. And then they took a 6-week recess. And they're supposed to meet on September 17th, but something very bad happened. Look at that schedule. Is that a schedule of a legislature intent on seceding their state? I'm sorry, but we can't work on the state secession. We've got to take a 6-week recess in August. The blue crabs are running, the rockfish are running. They met for 1 week, they took another 5-week recess. What did they do in their first session? Their first session from April 26th and May 14th, they basically did 3 things. One we've already talked about. They addressed to the people of Maryland by the General Assembly. And then they had a report on the call of cyber intervention, and then they passed some resolutions. And they then adjourned. Again, they addressed the people of Maryland on the 27th. The citizens of Maryland have been induced to believe that there is a probability that our deliberations may result in the passage of some measure committing a state to secession. It is therefore our duty to declare that all such fears are without foundation. We know we have no constitutional authority to take such action. You need not fear that there's a possibility that we will. About 3,000 copies of this proclamation was printed and disseminated throughout Maryland and all the press. It was carried in all the presses. Everyone knew the legislature did not want to secede or stated they had no constitutional authority. And then they had a report on call of a sovereign convention. And that would be the only way Maryland could secede is if the legislature did call a sovereign convention, they sent delegates, they passed an ordinance of secession, and the people voted on it. And they did this report. And in the report was also a protest. And they state Maryland's position, not merely on our own account and to turn away from their own soil, the calamities of civil war, but for the blessed sake of humanity and to avoid the wanton shedding of fraternal blood in a miserable contest which did nothing with it, the sorrow, shame, and desolation. The people of Maryland are enlisted with their whole hearts on the side of reconciliation and peace. They also, in the report became the resolution, so it's kind of one and the same. Resolve, not merely on their own account, and to turn away from their own soil, the calamities of civil war, but for the blessed sake of humanity and to avoid the wanton shedding of fraternal blood. Okay, I already said that one. Yes, here we go. Next one. This is harder, I think it is. To our own self-respect for the Constitution, they thought the war was unconstitutional. And they announced their resolute determination to have no part or lot, directly or indirectly, in the war. We're not going to participate in this war, Mr. Lincoln. We don't want war. We want peace. So they resolved that. And they also passed a resolution in the report. It is inexpedient to call a sovereign convention of the state at this time or to take any measure for the immediate organization or arming of the militia. And they said in their report, they said that the Committee of Federal Relations says do not do anything that could be construed as hostile. Nothing. Don't do anything that could be construed as hostile to the federal government. They said we're not going to get a militia in any kind of readiness. We're not going to order arms. We're not going to call a sovereign convention. We're not going to order issue ordinance of secession. You think that would be Maryland history. And that's all they did. The first session, right there. You hear it. Right there. You can go in and download it yourself. Maryland State Archives, read everything. It's right there for you. On their way home from Frederick, from that session, may they arrest House Delegate Ross Winnings. Ross Winnings, I said in the first class, is a very wealthy industrialist, one of the wealthiest men in America. And he's also a philanthropist. He fed thousands of Baltimore through the soup kitchen, black and white, it didn't matter. And he decided to take up politics. And on the way home, when the train stopped at Relay, federal troops came aboard, Winnings was sitting right next to the governor. Winnings, come with me, took him off the train. You were arrested. For what grounds? Any grounds. Arrested him. What had happened, Mr. Winnings? He owned still a lot of businesses. And one of the businesses he owned was a foundry in Baltimore, and there was a steam gun that could shoot 200 rounds a minute at a Winnings foundry. The owner was working on it, fabricating some parts. After April 19th, during army neutrality, they used the steam gun a little bit. He put it in front of City Hall. But what happened, that steam gun was going over to Virginia, and Union troops captured it on the way to Virginia. Carried over. Had Virginia seceded at this time, in May 14th? Well, common knowledge is Virginia seceded April 17th, but they didn't. They passed an ordinance. People voted on secession on May 23rd. Anyway, General Butler thought that Mr. Winans was trying to sell a steam gun to the Virginians, so he had him arrested. Habeas corpus was denied. Jeez, there's a steam gun right there. There's Ross Winans. There's General Butler. Denied Mr. Winans habeas corpus. No civilian trial review. I'm going to try you by military court-martial. And we found that it was Butler's intention to have Mr. Winans publicly executed in a public square in Baltimore to teach Marylanders a lesson. And where did I get this from? I got this from General Butler's own autobiography. That was his intention, to do that. What else we see here? Tried by military court-martial. That is against the Constitution. You cannot try a civilian in a state non-secession by military court-martial. He has a right to trial by his peers. If he had been tried by his peers, he probably wouldn't be in this bill. Butler became, I'll tell you what happened to Winans. So we got the Maryland governor got involved. He sent Reverdy Johnson to go meet with President Lincoln. Reverdy Johnson knew Lincoln. They were railroad lawyers. And Reverdy Johnson explained to President Lincoln that steam gun that Butler's, imprisoned Winans for trying to sell it to Virginia, it's actually owned by a guy named Dickinson. He's from New Jersey. It's his gun. Winans had nothing to do with it. Oops. But it all goes to show already the Constitution is being violated. As a general to patrol, I'm going to arrest you. I'm going to use you as an example. I'm going to hang you publicly. Teach these Marylanders a lesson. If I can hang the richest one of these Marylanders, the others will settle down. And that's from General Butler's autobiography. He would have done it too. What's that? Lincoln ordered Winans' release. Once Reverdy Johnson explained to him, and Lincoln knew Reverdy Johnson because they had practiced law together, that, hey, the steam gun's owned by Dickinson. He's from New Jersey. Just happened to be, Dickinson was using Winans' shop to have stuff fabricated for it. And, oops. So that kind of shows you can't bring evidence to your own defense. You can't have a trial. That you can be, and it also goes to show you how rapidly things are breaking down in Maryland. This is May 14th. Also, during the recess of legislation, we had the famous Ex parte Merryman case. Everyone heard about it. Everyone thinks that Ex parte Merryman is about the suspension of habeas, and it was. But I think much, much more to that. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, although he was a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he was sitting on the Circuit Court of Maryland. He said he was Chief Justice of Chambers. We argue authority, it doesn't really matter. This is one of Taney's best decisions. He did the Dred Scott, which was one of the worst things he ever came out with in history. But this is, he's lauded as being one of the best. And the Ex parte Merryman, he said that the president has no authority to suspend habeas corpus. No authority for this as act of Congress. The president and the military have no authority to arrest or to try civilians by military tribunal. This is the elephant in the room right there. No, we keep thinking of habeas corpus. This is the elephant in the room. The Constitution gave the president or the military zero authority to go into the state and arrest or try civilians. What does a dictator need if you lose your democracy and we turn into a dictatorship? You need a couple things. You need people to support you. Well, every dictator has that. I'm not saying Lincoln's a dictator. I'm just giving you an example. Engineering. You need to control the press, so you can badmouth your bad people and make yourself good. And you need a military force. You need some military force loyal to you. And this was already happening. The military was totally loyal to Lincoln, and the military is imprisoning and arresting the civilians in Maryland. Taney said that the military had no authority over civilian authority. There's no authority to put provost marshal in Baltimore and other locations. He said there was Fourth Amendment violations that the executive office is doing. What is Fourth Amendment? The right of the people to secure their persons, homes, and papers. We saw the example in a newspaper article. This is Marietta. They kicked in her front door at midnight and came in and searched her home. There's no warrant. Then they went off over beef and cattle and took her stuff. Fifth Amendment violations, taking private property. That was rampant. You saw that in a lot of newspaper articles. That's what Taney said. And Sixth Amendment violations. The right to trial by jury of your peers in the area where you're accused. So that was the ex parte Merriman. That happened while the legislature was in recess. Now they come back into recess again for the June 4th and June 25th. And they did some administrative stuff. And I forgot to mention, during the first session, one other thing. Besides what I showed you, they sent peace commissioners to meet with Davis and Lincoln for the Maryland legislature. Peace commissioners. The goal of the peace commissioners was to get them to hold off hostilities until the Congress could meet and maybe work something out. So the Maryland legislature did also. So when it came back into session June 4th, first they had some administrative stuff to handle. You see the disarmament of the state military, message from the governor. They dealt with what the peace commissioners said, from Davis had told them, and what Lincoln had told them. Lincoln didn't really participate. Jefferson Davis said, I will drop my sword as soon as the sword drawn against us is sheathed. But they really didn't accomplish anything. It was kind of too late. And then we have over here on the right, the petition of Richard B. Carmichael and others. There's actually 40 others from Queen Anne's County. What did they say in that petition? One, they didn't want the legislature to adjourn. They want you to stay going. But they said, over here in Nation Shore, Maryland, we've got some troops from other states, and they were arrested, and they were searching, they were confiscating, and they are violating every constitutional amendment we know. And that's what's going on over here. We need you, legislature, to act. And this, from this right here, we see Secretary Seward send a memo or order to General Dix. We need this guy Carmichael in Fort Lafayette. He should be imprisoned. That's where you got the attention. Right there. Okay, they did produce something. They produced two things. After dealing with administration, the first thing they did, the protest by the General Assembly against illegal arrest and imprisonment by the federal government of citizens of Maryland. They did a very large protest of that. And what did they say in that? Just a few words of this. We register this, their earnest and unqualified protest against the oppressive and terrible assertion and the exercise of military jurisdiction within the limits of Maryland over the persons and property of our citizens. Do not arrest our citizens. Do not take their property. Do not do all this other stuff. And they talk about, he says that if you go further in this, the same to be subversive of the most sacred guarantees of the Constitution and in flagrant violation of the fundamental and most cherished principles of American free government. It was a protest. And I'm not doing a good job keeping up. There's some words.
Do you want Trina to move the slides for you?
Do you want to move the slides, Ken?
I can do it.
Yeah, might be better. I got two hands, so I was apologizing.
That'll be just there.
I'll just say next slide. All right. Resolved. We can do no less to enter into solemn protest against the said acts of the president and declare the same to be a gross usurpation, unjust, oppressive, tyrannical, and an utter violation of the common right of the plain provisions of the Constitution. They weren't protesting about slavery. In fact, the whole summer of 1861, everything it produced, you're not going to find the word slavery, abolition, anything in it. It wasn't about that. Constitutional violations. Next slide, please.
Now, I'll let you change it.
You do it?
There we go.
All right, hang on, maybe gone too far. Okay, so then we have, they adjourned. That was their second session. What did they do? They dealt with the governor disarming. When they declared the governor, you're in violation of the Constitution. Maryland, you can't send it. They dealt with what the peace commissioners, well, they really was able to do much. And they put out a protest about the constitutional violations. Second session done. Took a 5-week recess. Come back in for their third and final session. But what happened in between? All the good stuff happened while they were recess. Back up one slide, please. Here we go. We know on June 27th, they arrested Baltimore police chief. We talked about it last time. And they replace the provost marshal, replaces law in Baltimore. Police commissioners, you have a job. Next slide, please. And then on July 1st, they imprison the police commissioner without charge, trial, or anything. You better let me do this. Give me it back. Is it hard yet?
I'm trying to listen to your tone.
No.
And you're going up. So
And before I talk to police commissioners protesting Congress, so And that's the main thing having recess. The imprisonment of police commissioners, the takeover of Baltimore, the imprisonment of Marshall King, habeas corpus denied, you're in jail, no rights whatsoever. So now they come back into session for their time in August after a 5-week recess. It was a 1-week session. And they did two things. First thing they did is they reviewed the report for police commissioners. Remember, police commissioners protested Congress and sent the legislature a copy of it. And they put out their own report and resolutions, which was their final protest. And it was titled, it's a very long title, Report and Resolutions of the Joint Committee of the Senate and House of Delegates of Maryland upon the reports and memorials of the police commissioners and the mayor and city council of Baltimore. Big long report, 25 pages, plus the attached memorials, probably 42 pages. And for short, this came to be known as the Wallace Report, after the chairman of the Federal Relations Committee. Thank you.
Well, I think,
Oh, geez.
no, it's because whenever I switched back, it
Okay.
gets switched back.
There he is, Senator Jack Wallace. He's the chairman of the Federal Relations Committee. He's a Baltimore lawyer. He's a member of the House of Delegates. So they call this a Wallace Report because that was too long to say. And this would be their final protest to date. And what did they protest about? A lot of it was the same stuff that Roger B. Taney said, ex parte Maryland, but they went further. They said the power to suspend habeas corpus is for Congress only, not the president. Some people argue, what's the difference? President, Congress, what is it a big deal? Let's think about this. And what happened in the Civil War? The authority that suspended habeas was also the authority that decided what you will be imprisoned for, and for how long, and if you will get out. Okay, so let's all do an example here. I don't care if you're far left, far right, I don't care. Let's say 4 years from now, your worst president imaginable is elected. And if you don't want to pick what's in play, pick Richard Nixon or whoever, but the worst possible. And we have a crisis, and habeas has to be suspended. Which means your son or your daughter can be thrown in jail and locked away. Do you want the president and his psychopath cabinet members to decide for what that'll be? Or do you want Congress to decide? No matter how it is, there's the other party looking over the other party's shoulders. There's checks and balances. And you have your own representative that you can go to. I want Congress to do it, not the president. Besides that, habeas corpus came from English law. For about 500 years before America existed, only Parliament, not the king, could suspend habeas. And to say that the president is suspended is saying that we have less civil liberties than we had when we were under English rule. But in essence, habeas corpus, when suspended, it separates the citizen from the Constitution. If I, as president, can imprison you for anything I want, you have no rights under the Constitution. You did a political protest against me. I don't like it. You're in prison. If you had a right to go before Judge Kehoe here in Talbot County and say, what did you do? Well, I said that I think Mr. Callahan should not be commissioner. Well, that's your right. You'd be released. But I suspended that right to go before the judge. And you can violate every citizen's constitutional rights with the suspension of habeas. You don't like what a newspaper editor is saying about you? Imprison them. You got a political opponent that's too, imprison them. Whatever it is, you do not have a right. Because even if you make a complaint, imprison them. And so habeas corpus is that such an important right. It is a basic right that connects our citizens with the Constitution. That judge, that civilian judge, is going to evaluate you by the laws under the Constitution. It's that important. Some people say, well, it's just industry. It's hugely important. The legislature said in this report, the power to declare war is by Congress only, and Lincoln violated the Constitution. I'm here. The military occupying Maryland and private homes without consent of the people being occupied or Maryland is a violation of the Constitution. Military conducting unlawful arrests of civilians is a violation of the Constitution. Military place security of civilian law, violation of the Constitution. Provost marshals were going throughout Maryland, not just Baltimore. Forced removing Marylanders from the state. We're in prison, we're sent off to Fort Lafayette, Baltimore Harbor. You don't get a trial. The Constitution says you have a right to trial here. They did something wrong, trial. Another constitutional law. I see what they're saying in the report. He said there's violations of the Second Amendment. This goes beyond Judge Kennedy's ruling. And we saw that with the demilitarization of the militia, but more so. If they thought you fell in that group of disloyal, they'd come to your home and take your guns, no questions asked. They violated the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment they violated, which we already talked about, unlawful search and seizures. They kicked down your home. If you were disloyal, they took what they wanted. Another thing in Maryland, if you want to read about what it was like, the violations, Claudia Floyd, Maryland women in the Civil War. She documents that there was 450 court-martials, Union court-martials, for rape against Maryland women. And she said that was grossly underreported. In 1860s, Maryland women didn't report such abuses. There was 450 of them. It was every bit of your constitutional rights, and as a human citizen, you were subjugated during the occupation of Maryland. In the report also, they said violation of the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment, the right to counsel. But the only thing they didn't say was a violation of the First Amendment, and that was soon to come. Okay, these slides are good. We're a little more than halfway through, so we're doing good. Let me catch up. The Wallace Report was very eloquently written, and its arguments applies to us today. The arguments Lincoln was using was necessary. How it is because of necessity. The Maryland legislature said, once let necessity of any sort be recognized as above the Constitution, and our system is anything and everything which it may be found necessary to make. As necessity has no law, so it has no limit. The same logic by which it justifies the suspension of one constitutional provision would justify, in like case, the overthrow of all. The same pretext which invokes the suppressive functions of the judiciary may call for the suppression of Congress as well. And that's referring to Lincoln's ignoring Judge Roger B. Taney. And then they say, here's the position of Maryland. It is not a question of union or disunion, of North or South, of treason or loyalty. It is a naked and desperate alternative of constitutional government and free institutions on one hand, and state annihilation and individual enslavement on the other. Probably a bad choice of words, enslavement, but that's what they use. And here's what they said on August 6th. They voted. This is important. There is but one recourse left to us, and that is to appeal to public opinion and a sense of right of the whole country, to call upon free and true men everywhere in our own state and in our sister states, to lift their voices for the rescue of the Constitution before it shall have gone down into the vortex, whose narrow and rapid circles have already swept its great bulwarks around the rights of the people of Maryland. They voted, they said that on August 6th. They ordered 25,000 copies of their protest to be printed. Their intention was to disseminate it throughout the United States. That's what they intended to do. They then adjourned. The next day, the very next day on August 7th, President Lincoln clamps down on the press. Given any military intelligence that's not authorized by the Commanding General, is punishable by death. And he clamped down on the press very, very tightly. Now I bring in some more modern historians to help us out in this case. That's what I did too. Harold Holzer, Lincoln in the Power of the Press. And Elizabeth Mitchell, Lincoln's Lie, the true Civil War caper through fake news, Wall Streets, and the White House. And what did they tell us in their research? Well, they said, for Harold Holzer, said it was a new era in the Civil War. There was 50,000 miles of telegraph wire. They could transmit information instantly. It was all Morse code, but it got transmitted. Harold Holzer said we had these new print presses, steam power. You can cheaply produce newspapers, very inexpensive. And then guess what? The American population is very literate. And Lincoln used this to his advantage to mold public opinion. Holzer said Lincoln definitely used the press to mold public opinion and called Lincoln the manipulator in chief. But we also find something a little bit more ominous. We found that in the election leading up to election, that Lincoln had secretly purchased a German newspaper. He thought the German vote was very important. And he got a contract, a secret, he had a contract with him. If you say anything negative about me, I will seize your presses and shut you down. You will say only good stuff about me. And we also, Holzer and Mitchell, document that Lincoln, both during the election and during the Civil War, often ghost wrote a lot of articles to dissemination to the press. And it would be pro-Lincoln or against your opponents. And you notice one thing in those historical newspaper articles, he didn't say he wrote them. You can read all of them, it doesn't say by whatever person. But that's what these two, Holzer and Mitchell, and now others also, about Lincoln's, really how important it was for Lincoln from public opinion. And then Harold Holzer both cite Lincoln as saying, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Against it, nothing can succeed. Whoever molds public sentiment goes deeper than who enacts statutes or pronounces judicial decisions. He makes enforcement of all these else impossible. Public opinion. Lincoln was a master at molding public opinion.
So what happened to the 50,000 copies?
We're gonna get to that. 25,000 copies,
Whatever it was.
and we're gonna get to that. We're coming up to it. So we're saying Lincoln took to call the press.
Is that a quote from Lincoln?
Yes, they found that in his notes on the Douglas case. So he had written it down in his handwriting. Okay, so now he took control of all military information in the press. We know Lincoln has very definitely important to him how to mold public opinion to get things done. And on August 16th, the New York Herald published a special Washington dispatch from the War Department. And this is so good, I'm going to read it to you. The efforts of the rebels to revolutionize Maryland, the efforts of the rebels to gather Maryland into the secession fold have not been abandoned. It was noted some weeks ago that a considerable rebel force had been concentrated in the upper part of Accomack County, on the eastern shore of Virginia. It appears that there are about 1,500 or 2,000 rebels under arms. General Tillman of Talbot County, that's us, who was deposed from his militia rank last spring by Governor Hicks and subsequently restored by the state legislature, is organizing its unions in the lower counties of Maryland. Is about to proceed to Accomack, take command of Virginia forces there, and march them up to the middle of the eastern shore of Maryland as a nucleus for the formation of a rebel army there, which shall, if it can do nothing else, control the elections in the fall so as to secure its union majority in the legislature and enable the secessionists to pass a secession ordinance or, perhaps more immediately, enforce an ordinance of secession. It's August 16th, New York Herald, from the War Department. It wasn't a single article. On the 19th, we see from another special important order from the Secretary of War. What we told you last week, we were reassuring with more assurances of truth. With an increased assurance of its truth and with such evidence as can be told. That was on the 19th. And then on the 20th, the New York Herald publishes a very, very long and detailed article about General Tillman and the secessionists on the eastern shore. And again, this is so juicy. Let's go through some of this. You were advised last week that a movement of a rebel force from the eastern shore of Virginia into Maryland was afoot. The maneuver of the enemy begins to assume formidable proportions and considerable importance. It is ascertained that instead of being intended merely to arouse the rebels in Maryland and sustain its disunion legislature and enforce an ordinance of secession, it is designed to cooperate in an attack on the city of Washington by seizing the railroads and canals and cutting off communication between Philadelphia and Baltimore, simultaneously with the attack on Washington by the forces under Beauregard and Johnson. The plan is well matured. The lower part of Delaware is filled with rebels. There are companies of rebels already organized and armed there, as well as in the lower counties of the eastern shore of Maryland. Rebels from all over parts of Maryland have been recently flooded that section. And I'll go into it, but again, it goes into the execution of Eastern Shore Project has been entrusted to General Tench Tillman and ex-Governor Enoch Low. This is a very long article. It goes into exact detail. We're going to use this railroad, that railroad. We're going to take the Union ship Apache and Pawnee, we're going to block them. You're telling what the defense is going to be, the attack. But again, let me reiterate. This article is saying that the Maryland legislature is coordinated with the rebel army and with General Tillman. General Tillman brings forces up to block Washington from the north. The Maryland legislature issued an ordinance of secession, and the rebel forces of Johnson and Beauregard will come across and attack Washington from the flank, from the War Department. Now, what do we find? This is why newspapers.com, a new feed, is so great, because we find New York Herald, August 21st, General Tillman's denial. Here we go. That letter, hey, that's saying I was going to do this. I am not organizing this union in Maryland or anywhere else, nor did I know of any such organization. I am not about to proceed to act on that. I have no knowledge of any attempt or intention to take or introduce troops into this or any other part of Maryland to enforce an order of secession. He basically said, it's all a bloody lie. He said, I'm gonna hold you accountable. The New York Herald published this. All the other newspapers did not. Well, let me back up just one slide real quick. I forgot to tell you this. This article about what I just told you about the Maryland seceding, General Tillman coming up and the Army, I found it in every major United States paper, Chicago, Boston, everywhere. I found it in every paper in Canada. I found this article, or a portion of, in every major paper in Europe, at least English paper. I didn't check the French papers. Dozens and dozens and dozens. If the whole world thought General Tillman was going to lead an army, General Tillman was more famous worldwide than Robert E. Lee. This part of the Civil War. It went everywhere. Because I said, it took 10 days to go across the land. It went everywhere. Now, let's talk about the status of Maryland in 1861 very quickly.
So wait a minute.
Yep,
So, okay, you said this article was all over the world.
yep.
Where did it come from? So,
The War
what's your
Department.
implications?
The War
Washington. Washington was lying.
Yeah, it came from Special Dispatch in Washington. Some say from the War Department, some they say Special Dispatch in Washington. Remember, August 7th, Lincoln took control of the press. He said, any military information disseminated without authorization of the commanding general is punishable under Article 57 of the Wars Act, punishable by court-martial subject to death.
Then how about the article written by Tillman the next day at 9? How did that get into the press?
I don't know, he did it. I don't know. I don't have to, but I'm telling you, all this military information that was disseminated about these attacks in Europe came from Washington. That's what you need to know. That's where it came from, Special Dispatches. Yes, sir.
There was a Confederate army in Manassas headed by generals.
Yeah, there was Confederates in that, not 200,000. We're gonna get to that.
Yeah, but the point is that General Tillman's order to the militia out here indicated that to arms against the Unions. And
No, you gotta read the book. We're not gonna debate General Tillman's order. Some people say, he was decommissioned by General Governor Hicks because of his order. His order was a warning order. I want half of you to prepare to deploy. Other half, prepare to defend Talbot County. Prepare to deploy to act the direction of civilian authorities. The governor may need us, so let's get ready to go. And they had that order, at the direction of civilian authorities.
So again, where's the legislative 25,000 legislative?
They're printed and being printed. And you're gonna find
Okay, so
out.
you said it came from the War Department. and
Correct.
something like that. Well, how do we know that they did that purposefully just so that they could justify their actions? I mean, we're talking about the 1860s. There were rumors all over the place. You had a Southern Army in Virginia, which was coming up. Maybe they believed some of the fog that the other side was putting out, and they exaggerated it.
Okay, so. Important news from Washington.
Yeah.
One says from the War Department. Yes, thank you.
Well, that's August 20th. A month before that, there had been the Battle of Bull Run.
Yeah,
And
okay, let's move on.
Wait a minute.
We're the question's the end, Nikki. Okay, we're good to move
That's
on.
not working because you're presenting all these things and we can't answer.
You will ask questions at the end.
Yeah, the end
Question,
question,
the questions will be answered in the next couple slides. Question, we're having this 25,000 copies that are being printed. Let's move on. Status of Maryland, 1861. Yes, there was an army in Virginia. Everyone knows that. How many? How many were in Virginia in fall of 1861?
What?
You know, how many? How many were in Virginia?
anyway,
How large was the rebel army in Virginia in 1861, September? 30, 40?
I have no idea.
Anyway, doesn't matter. Let's go to the status of Maryland, September 1861. Maryland militia was disarmed. We beat that to death. All the militia arms. Governor Hicks had become very pro-union. We know that also because he became a disarmed Maryland and became a general in the Union Army afterwards. Most of Maryland and all key locations in Maryland were occupied by September of 1861.
So there's a key piece.
The guns of
missing.
Fort
That's why-
McHenry?
Wait a minute, there's a key piece missing. What were the general population of Maryland? Hicks may have been pro-union, but how did the people in Maryland feel in general?
Do you remember what I said about constitutional unionists and unconditional unionists?
Right.
Majority of Marylanders were unionists. Unionists.
Okay.
Okay, all right, we already went through that. Okay, status in 1861. What happened? Okay, we said Maryland was disarmed. Hicks was pro-union. Most of Maryland was occupied. Baltimore had the guns of Fort McHenry and Federal Hill pointed to them on the city. Almost all who wanted to fight against the Union had left Maryland, had already left early in 1861. So pretty much Maryland was armed. And now we have a statement by General Dix. Whilst we have no difficulty controlling Maryland by force, that is not what was wanted, but that is what we wish to control is by the power of opinion. So General Dix says no difficulty controlling Maryland militarily. So you've seen what the Maryland legislature had done to the point. There was no act of secession, nothing. They did nothing but protest against constitutional elections. I'm not even making it. And then we saw these news reports that came from Washington about they were going to secede. And so then on September 11th, we see Secretary Cameron issues orders to the passage of an act of secession while the legislature of Maryland must be prevented. And he told General, I guess McClellan, I think it was, that to arrest the Maryland legislature. We just read about it in the press that they're going to secede and they're coordinating. September 12th, the next day, the entire page of the New York Herald depicted the rebel army, 150 to 200,000 rebels. Okay, and yes, there was Confederates in Northern Virginia. There were 200,000 depicted exact details where they were, getting ready to attack and come across the Potomac. And what did the article say? What did it say? Seeing the coming decisive conflict. And what did the accompanying article say? It says they will cross as soon as the Maryland legislature issues their ordinance of secession, and they will cross. There's a slide of it, very exact details of the military Confederate Army, which is false. That very night, back up. It was that very night. Okay, that night. This is published on September 14th, the Herald. But that very night is when the arrest began. Who they arrested? They went through Baltimore, and they arrested members of the legislature, the mayor, Ross Winnings, and Congressman Henry Meigs. That very night. And then we have more published articles. Upon one of them was found a draft ordinance of secession. In others, cause of the arrest of secessionists in Baltimore, the plot to carry Maryland out of the Union, fortunate frustration of the Union scheme. They're saying the arrest of the legislature just foiled the whole Confederate plan to cross the Potomac and attack Washington. Let's see here. And again, September 14th. It is known that some of the arrested secessionist members of the legislature had a program all prepared by which an act was to be passed, declaring Maryland out of the Union and a state in the Southern Confederacy. The movement of the rebel army up the river was preparatory to the contemplated movement across. The attempt was to be made when the day the legislature acted. Now, on September 17th, the legislature members came back to Frederick for the final session. The 3rd Wisconsin was waiting for them. The 3rd Wisconsin were tasked with conducting the arrests of the legislature. Some members, when he arrested again, went into hiding. So it was about a 48-hour operation. They surrounded the city of Frederick. They went house to house to get all these secessionists to imprison them. And then when they imprisoned them again, Washington put out more press releases. Among those arrested found more ordinance and papers of copies of an act of secession were found. And they found papers which proved beyond doubt that there was a perfect understanding between the lenders of the rebel army now before Washington and secessionists of Maryland. Remember, these articles went out from Washington, were going worldwide. Britain, British people reading it, London, all the North. Aha. Good thing they arrested those Maryland legislature, because look at all what they were doing. So, here's something that history didn't quite find. and I found it, and I found several separate sources to it. The 3rd Wisconsin were instructed, oops, wrong one, to arrest all those who voted for the Wallace Report and to seize and find and burn all copies. That's their instructions. Arrest everyone who voted yea on that Wallace Report. Find those copies, burn it, it's treasonable. The report I just showed you. That report right here. Here, man. I'll pass it out. Several sources on that. I found where a member of the 3rd Wisconsin also wrote about how they were given a copy. Because on that Wallace Report, everyone who voted yea was listed at the bottom. Here's all the voted yea. 42 for the House, 12 for the Senate. G.L. Jones of Talbot County voted yea. Lawrence Jones' occupation was as a mechanic. And they did. They burned all copies. Some reports said they found 50,000 copies, some said 30. The legislature ordered 25,000 copies to be printed. Here's the members who voted nay on the report. And I'm bringing this up. The majority voted yea. Some voted at H.H. Goldsboro, Talbot County, Maryland. The 2 staunchest unconditional unionists in the state was Governor Hicks and Henry Hobby Goldsboro, Talbot County. And I'm showing you this because you find with Judge Carmichael and Goldsboro have a little problem that following May that led to Goldsboro's arrest. Here's a list of the arrested. And they didn't arrest just not all of the people on the voted yea were arrested because they couldn't find everybody. They also arrested a lot of civil servants and also some innkeepers. Why? I don't know. And then they went to Annapolis and arrested the printer who was supposed to print those 25,000 copies. President Lincoln in the Baltimore American gave a statement about the arrest. It's important. And he says, remember what he said to Congress about the Baltimore Police Commissioners? He said in a statement to the Baltimore American, the public safety renders it necessary that the grounds of these arrests should at present be withheld, but at the proper time they will be made public. Of one thing the people of Maryland may rest assured, that no arrest has been made or will be made not based on substantial and unmistakable complicity with those armed rebellion against the government of the United States. In no case has an arrest been made on mere suspicion or through personal or partisan animosities, but in all cases the government is in possession of tangible and unmistakable evidence which will, when made public, be satisfactory to every loyal citizen. Folks, it's been 162 years and the federal government or anyone else has not produced any evidence that the Maryland State Legislature did anything intended to be hostile towards the federal government. No orders of secession found. There was no army in Accomack, Virginia that Governor Tillman was leading. There was not 200,000 Confederates across the border. And by the way, and how do you know? Well, that was published on September 12th. Go into the War Rebellion. What was the Union generals doing? They were having a party. General Stone, in charge of the observation corps along Potomac, there's nothing across me. There's nothing over there. No big force, nothing going on. Who else said that? Someone else noticed that. R.P. Healy. He wrote The Fate of Liberty. He won the Pulitzer Prize. He talked about the rumors of attack in the fall of '61. But he also said, in reference to the Union generals, they weren't the least bit concerned. They had no concern of attack, but there was rumors of attack. Healy didn't catch the newspaper articles that I just showed you. In fact, my research is the first time it had ever been uncovered. These articles that went worldwide. Okay. The arrest of the Maryland legislature. Let's go back to Harold Holzer. The arrest of the Maryland legislature was simultaneous with the beginning of the suppression of all dissent of the Lincoln administration's war policies. That night, September 12th, they also imprisoned Frank Key Howard. I showed you that last class. Editor of the Daily Exchange, grandson of Francis Scott Key. He was a newspaper editor. In the fall of '61, the suppression of the press had risen to a level of a witch hunt, where some 200 newspapers And their editors were identified, menaced, arrested, imprisoned, humiliated, bankrupt, mobbed, or sacked. You could not dissent against a war policy, Lincoln, or you would be imprisoned. Habeas corpus was suspended. And I say this is violation of the First Amendment. And this happened just when, and what was the legislature doing? They were protesting. National imprisonments, conservative estimates is over 14,000 Americans in the loyal states, not in the other states, 14,000 Americans were imprisoned during the war. And during the war, over 300 newspapers were shut down and all were censored. Everyone was censored. Conclusions? Conclusions is there's no evidence the Maryland legislature was contemplating secession. You just witnessed everything they did. I read every one of their journals. And I forgot to add, their deliberations in front of them were open to the public. People came and sat in galleries and witnessed it. What they did every day was publish in the Baltimore Sun. They had one closed door session and talk about the safety committee for the state of Maryland, with the governor's head. And that went nowhere. One closed door session lasted about an hour. The rest was open to the public. No evidence whatsoever to countenance this. All they did was protest. And all they did is protest against violations of the United States Constitution. The internationally disseminated fake news reports were meant to manipulate public opinion, provide an acceptable reason for the arrest. And I can't go over it in an hour class. A lot of research went in. Was there any army in Accomack, Virginia? Nope. The Confederates, looking at their records, they pulled them out. They can't support an army on the eastern shore of Virginia. The Union controls it should be back. You can't cross back and forth. It wasn't. General Lockwood from Cambridge sent people down there. Nothing going on here. They said nothing's ever happened. Guess what? General Tillman, this big rebel leader, he never got the attention of Secretary Seward. Judge Carmichael did for writing that thing. But the big rebel, did Seward ever tell General Dix arrest Tillman? Nope. No, it was some captain that when he talked about all decided on his own to do it. The Maryland legislature was imprisoned to silence their protests and to gain control of the government of Maryland and to create vacancies that needed to be filled during that upcoming election. In the next class, we will talk about what happened during the elections in Baltimore and statewide in 1861 and 1863, and how they were manipulated and how they were controlled. And how, again, had a lot of imprisonments of candidates who ran for office. Now I will take your questions. Go ahead, yes, sir.
Why was Merriman arrested?
I'm sorry?
Why was Merriman arrested?
Maryland arrested?
Merriman.
Merriman, oh, John Merriman, yeah, that's good. John Merriman, late on the night of April 19th, after the civil arrest of Baltimore, the Baltimore Authority says there's more Union troops arriving next morning. They waited all day for President Lincoln to reply. He sent a delegation to Lincoln, he sent a telegraph to Lincoln. Lincoln was silent. Finally, they got a meeting. They were at Mayor Brown's house. The governor was staying the night at Mayor Brown's house, and they got together, police commissioners, the mayor, the governor. Troops are coming in the morning. The president won't talk to us. What do we do? And they told the governor, we can't let the Union troops come in. The people in Baltimore and 200 people arm themselves. They took every gun they could find. Now they're armed. They're roaming the streets. There will be bloodshed. So Governor Hicks ordered the bridges north of Baltimore to be burned to prevent a collision between the north and the south. John Merriman took part of that as part of the Baltimore Horse Guard militia.
So in fact, he was engaging in sabotage.
You can say that, yes.
So there was a basis for arresting him.
There's what?
A basis for.
There was a basis, yeah. They
As
took it
well as the
sabotage.
governor and the mayor, because they were promoting, asking him to commit a crime, basically.
Oh, well, yeah, you're right. They do know that if Union troops, militia of Massachusetts arrive in Baltimore next morning, there'd be huge bloodshed. Huge bloodshed.
Doesn't make any difference what their intent was. The point was they were asking this guy, the governor and the mayor, were asking him to go,
It was a governor's decision.
in essence,
Yeah.
destroy bridges, even if their intent was, all this good intent.
Oh, yeah.
It gives comfort and aid to the enemy.
And they were Marylanders too. They were Maryland. You're right. They use that argument. They use it. Oh, how treasonous, but.
So there was a basis for Merriman's arrest.
But Lincoln, yeah, that's right. There was a basis of it, but he needed to be tried.
Yes, I know. Now, Lincoln overstepped. But
There was a
nevertheless,
basis for it.
did he get out?
Yeah.
He wasn't,
Yeah, they dropped, he got out.
right, and all the rest of them got out too, right?
And so the North played that up, and they saboted. Here's the key I want you to take away. Why was Lincoln silent all day long?
Why was what?
Why did President Lincoln or his cabinet not respond to Baltimore all day long? The riots happened early in the day. He sent him a telegram. It got received. He sent a special train to meet with Lincoln. Here's the problem, Mr. President. What are you going to do, Mr. President? No answer. Zip. So the authorities of Maryland took it upon their own responsibility to take the action. The authorities of Maryland couldn't order the troops not to come through. Lincoln could order them, and he did later. Don't come to Baltimore. The president didn't respond. Why? He had time. What was the president and his cabinet doing all afternoon on 19th? All that evening? It was so important. He couldn't respond to the crisis of what was about to happen to Baltimore next week. Everyone knew what was going to happen. Those troops came in. It'd be bloodshed. The mayor couldn't control it. Police chief came to control it. The people took it upon themselves to arm themselves. And it would have been bloodshed. It could change the course of the war for America. So the real question is, why didn't the president's cabinet respond and say, okay, you need to stop, let's get this figured out, can we go around and do something? But he didn't. And that's kind of overlooked. That's important, because he had time. Yes, go ahead, sir.
So how does it change, how would it change the course of the war if the Baltimore public was against secession?
Okay, how would it change the course of the war if the Baltimore public was against secession? I don't think the Baltimore public had any change in the course of the war. What happened? First of all,
But they're the ones who armed themselves.
yes,
So they're arming themselves, and you said that they're against secession.
yes, correct.
So how does it change
And
the
by the way-
course of the troops that came in? Because they're the ones who say, we don't want us to see.
Because at this point, remember the articles I was putting up, where the North is saying, we will level Baltimore, we will destroy the
I'm
city.
talking about reality, I'm not talking about the.
That is reality.
No,
That's
the
what they
reality,
read.
the reality, from what I understand, is that you said this time and again,
Yeah.
the Baltimore public
Yeah.
did not want us to see.
That's correct.
The Baltimore public took up arms.
Not all, there's some that were after.
They took up, I don't care how many are. okay?
That's correct, to defend their city.
But they took up arms, okay?
Yeah.
They were going to fight who?
The militias from Massachusetts that were coming through shot their troops the day before.
To do what?
To do what?
Yeah. What were they going to, here you have a state who does not want us to see. You have the public who is taking up arms because they don't want us to see. You got Washington saying that they do want us to see, okay? Every year, people are concerned about these troops that don't exist, that are coming up from the south.
Their intention was, listen, the people of Baltimore were angry. And again, here's one other thing I was to say. The Baltimore riots, there's probably only 200 or 300 citizens that participated in riots. And the northern press like to say, all 300,000 Baltimoreans are rotten to the core. Well, you don't just have a couple hundred and say 300,000 are all the same. You don't look at the same. I think they're trying to say there must be some big intent here. Their intent was someone, a gang, whoever it was, came to your home and killed your son. They're coming tomorrow morning. What are you going to do about it? You call the police, they won't respond. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to say, well, you're going to arm yourself?
It's not the question.
Okay,
That's not the question I'm asking.
well, rephrase the question. You don't understand.
Well, sure, you've said time and again that Baltimore doesn't want us to see.
I think Maryland.
Didn't want us to see, okay? These troops are coming that don't exist.
Yeah.
All right? And you want to stop the troops that are coming that don't exist.
I mean, don't exist.
Well, the troops that are down
South
south,
City.
they're supposed to be coming north.
No, not on April 19th. the troops weren't coming north.
I thought-
So the anger of the Baltimore
That was the
people
fake
was
news thing,
the
wasn't it?
fact that the northern militias moved in Baltimore to enter the South. They were called, and to them, that was against their view of democracy. That was vulgar to them. They believed people have the right to choose their government. They didn't believe in secession. They didn't believe that secession. They thought they're rash. But they said, even though they're rash, they have the right to choose their own government. It's in our own Constitution. And now you, General Butthead from Massachusetts, are going to come down and go shoot them because our founding fathers said that in the Declaration of Independence. And that was the basis of the mob anger, seeing those troops going to Baltimore right then and there. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
It was against their view of democracy. Not so, they weren't trying to protect the South. I guess they were trying to protect the South, but they thought that was a gross violation of the Constitution and a gross usurpation of American democracy to have military force go into another state and, use force against them. That was their viewpoint. Yes, Nick?
Public statement was not for the troops, was to protect Washington from an attack by Confederates, not to occupy the state of Maryland. It was to protect Washington DC.
That's right. Lincoln said that.
And that is just the opposite of what General Tillman's order said. He claimed in his letter that the Union troops were occupying Maryland homes, and he had no such information. He made that up. That was disloyal, and that's why he was fired by the government. Now,
Thank you. I'm going to debate you. I'm going to do a class with General Tillman. I read his order in Harrison's book. I read the whole thing. And if I was a Marine Corps officer, and if this stuff was happening in our country and I had command, get ready to deploy. Get ready. In his order, whatever you say his order says, he gave some clarifying statement. The bottom line is that to support the civilian authorities of Maryland, he wasn't going on his own, to support the governor. He came under authority. But I'll have another class on it, maybe, and we'll talk about the children.
he was relieved of command immediately for that reason.
On May.
Because he did that without any authority.
Okay.
He did it on his
All right, when I do my class on that one, do we have another question?
So from the perspective of Marylanders, I can see where these things happen, and I would feel very similar. What was the motivation? I know they wanted to control the election, but what was Lincoln's motivation for suspending? Because is he just trying to be a jerk? Or was there some, if you were to try to argue from his perspective, what would you argue for doing those things?
Yes, I would, well, first of all, I would refer you to Frederick Douglass, Emancipation Memorial Speech, 1876. Douglass knew Lincoln, and he gave a very honest analysis of Lincoln's objectives and what he was trying to accomplish, and how he used slavery to support the objective of Union. Remember, the Emancipation Proclamation happened. So, I wish Lincoln lived longer, he could tell you himself. But, and I'm not saying that, if there's been a war, I want it to turn out how it did, don't get me wrong. But what we're studying here is what happened in Maryland. What you're studying here is the violations of the Constitution.
But you're
And
talking
using
about it
factors.
from that perspective only, and that's the part that's I'm confused about, because there's always two sides to the coin. Everybody thinks they're right, or they think they're doing it for the right reasons for themselves. And so for some reason, Lincoln, or I mean, maybe there's a rogue general that was doing some of these things. Like, Teddy Roosevelt is somewhat accused of starting the Spanish-American War because he wanted to go into battle, right? I mean, so, just trying to
I don't
understand
think-
that
well,
other
first of all,
side of it.
There's hundreds of books out there that talk Lincoln's side. Okay, there's only one book
But
that
that's
talks about what happened in
Maryland.
Maryland.
Right, but
One.
that's it, right.
So it's not my job to give Lincoln's side. I'm just saying, here's what happened. Now, I didn't go into what motivated Lincoln. I even said the Northern troops were patriots. They were doing what their country asked them to do. But the people of Maryland, Baltimore, thought it was vulgar and against democracy.
And I would agree with that.
So, and so I'm not really thinking sides, but I'm telling you the facts. Like you just heard everything the Maryland legislature did. Okay, now correlate that to the news reports the War Department put out. There's a lot,
Oh, absolutely.
and not only that,
And propaganda is a powerful tool.
and think about it. You're in the North, you're in Massachusetts, you got a bunch of sons, you read in the paper, the Confederates attacked Washington. You send your boys to help Lincoln.
Right.
He lied to the North.
Sure he did. I mean,
Is that okay with you?
Are you looking for motivation?
It's not okay. And that's your judgment call. I'm not gonna tell you how to think. That's not okay to me.
Paul, that's not what he's saying. He's asking you,
Oh.
why did Lincoln do that?
I'm asking you to defend him.
Yeah, he just-
asking you
He wants to
why.
know the other side.
I'm not
What's
listening
the-
to defend him one way or the other.
The only thing I say
Get a balance.
in Lincoln is that he wanted unionism above all costs.
Right.
And he said that, I want unionism. And personally, I think even House Divided's speech, which was really about slavery, I kind of think was like, you can't have 50 different states doing their own damn thing and leaving. Because remember, in the Civil War, there was other. We had northern states that threatened secession. We had the nullification crisis. So there's always every 30 years, someone's threatening secession. Divided house cannot stand. There's other books much better, Lincoln. The reality of the Civil War is it grossly changed our government and our democracy.
Sure.
Prior to Civil War, the United States are. People believe Maryland's been, I am a sovereign state and union with other sovereign states. The authority of the federal government comes from our states. People are sovereign, we can choose our government. That went away after the Civil War. It was only the United States. Might be a good thing. We might be speaking Russian or German if we didn't have a very strong United States. So don't get me wrong when I talk about Lincoln and negative parts that I'm pro-Southern. I told you, they were rash, they were irresponsible, the 7 Southern states. But the issue was, for Maryland, sending troops into those states, that was vulgar to them. Yes, they,
Paul, you and I have been through this many times privately. I will say that in a nice and as respectful a way as I can, is that you don't see the forest for the trees.
Mickey, I'm not gonna argue with
Here's
you.
the point. The point is Lincoln was protecting the Union and the Constitution from the immediate threat of the Confederacy trying to destroy the country. And
Okay,
so
so-
Marylanders who joined in the Confederacy were the immediate threat to the U.S. Constitution and to the state of Maryland.
Okay, so Mr.
The
Trump
majority
said
of
that the
Marylanders-
Confederacy, hang on, let me finish now, you talk long enough. Mr. Trump and that's a typical myth. You say that the Confederacy, you're saying that the act of secession was an act of revolution.
It was. Robert E. Lee said.
Hang on, revolution is when you're trying to take over your government. The southern states are trying to secede and leave the government.
Not when they fire on Fort Sumter. Robert E. Lee
They were,
said.
you can argue what, but there's a lot of people trying to say that the southern states were trying to dominate the northern states. It wasn't. They weren't trying to, they weren't capturing Washington. They could, it happened, but they would have sued for peace. All the major evidence, the southern states wanted to be let alone. And the Maryland police commissioners who came back from Jeff Davis said that President Davis says, we will sheathe our sword as soon as the sword drawn against us is sheathed. We will throw down our sword as soon as the sword against us is sheathed. So some people want to put the Civil War as a revolution. These southern states are trying to take over the North and take over everything. There's very lack of evidence for that. Just because they entered Maryland during the campaign or fired for Sumter, they were trying to leave secession. In fact, the Revolutionary War was really, we call it Revolutionary War with down in Florida. This is really more of an act of secession. We didn't go to England and try to take over their government. We just wanted to leave the government. And I think that's another misconception you have of the Civil War. I like to see arguments for it, but I never saw anywhere that I've read that Jefferson Davis wanted to dominate the North, take over Washington, and change all the government of the North. They just wanted to be left alone.
I think you did.
That's another question.
Okay, so, when President Lincoln is being, basically accused of violating all these amendments of the Constitution.
Yes.
That was only applied in the state of Maryland, right?
No.
Except for the press?
No, my book goes more to that. So remember, these accusations of Lincoln, I gave you two. I gave you the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Maryland, and we gave the legislature and their Wallace report, cite these violations. The violations went northward very rapidly. The Maryland legislature even said to this to people north. You were okay with the fact that Maryland now, who knows what a season of whatever, he says, a usurpation of power knows those limits. By the fall of 1862, October 1862, habeas corpus was suspended throughout the United States. And guess what? Secretary Simon, or Cameron, I think it was Simon, drafted the order. Lincoln didn't even take time to write it. And I had all these things. You know what it said in that order? It said any military officer, any constable of police has the right to imprison anyone. And they gave all these reasons, and they sounded pretty good at first, but at the end it says, for any disloyal act. And so by the fall of October of 1862, Davis was suspended up north. New Yorkers did not like that at all. Governor Horatio Seymour of New York got his Attorney General, Oakley Hall in Brooklyn, to indictments against General Dix for the unlawful and unconstitutional imprisonment of citizens of New York. There was going to be a big trial. And it so Governor Seymour and General Dix and Lincoln were going head to head when it went northward. We also have what they call the Corning letter, where I think it was New Yorkers also wrote Lincoln about the violations of the Constitution, treason. And that was very insightful for Lincoln's view of that. And Lincoln's view that anything he wrote back, pretty much, I can arrest anyone for any reason that I want. And if you're in this world, being quiet during a conversation about the conflict and not defending the North, you're disorder. You're
Congress on all this.
Congress seemed like Congress was very classy. Remember he arrested U.S. Congressman Henry May, right, in Pico. He went in and arrested U.S. Congressman.
Right.
Congress, so in 1863, Congress did pass the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act. Lincoln did it himself. 62, they passed the act. And the Lincoln administration, hell, see, I'm vindicated. Congress did also another thing. They instructed the president that every political prisoner, they were called political prisoners, their cases shall be reviewed, and anyone that's not a threat to the safety shall be released. That was totally ignored. That part of that act that Congress put upon President Lincoln was ignored. It never occurred.
Congress also did a session in 1861. Congress sat from July to August 1861 and basically approved of Lincoln's actions, all the different proclamations and different things that he had done between the time that the war started, when they fired on Fort Sumter, and when Congress came in session in, I don't remember the exact date, but it was sometime in July 4th, 1861.
Yeah, you know what, that's very good. I can't say I really studied what Congress did to approve. I do know one of the first things they did, they put out the proclamation, said to the people of America, saying this war is about union only. It's not about slavery. Slavery was saying, they put out that proclamation. I know they did not rebuke President Lincoln. Whether they did specific reviews of him or not, I can't tell you that. I do know that they addressed the protests given to them by the Baltimore police commissioners, very detailed. This is why we're protesting. Here's our violation of rights. Congress passed a resolution asking Mr. Lincoln to explain. And Mr. Lincoln says, on the grounds of public safety, I can't tell you. And Congress was okay with that.
Yeah, they actually,
So now,
it's the 37th Congress, and I looked it up. It's a huge, long act,
yeah,
and they approved of everything that Lincoln had done, all the proclamations that he had issued. For example, he issued a proclamation to basically blockade the southern ports, and they approved of that. They
But
approved
now-
of his other acts.
something, you gotta remember now, let's go back to what the Supreme Court said. I think it was ex parte Milligan.
Well, he was one judge, that was not the Supreme Court.
Okay, but no, that's
He was
fair.
acting as a
Ex parte
second judge.
Milligan, happened to end the Civil
Yes.
War. And I think Milligan or afterwards even said, Congress cannot violate the Constitution. When they addressed that Congress gave Lincoln, they gave Lincoln the authority to suspend it, and Congress delegated their authority to Lincoln. I think the Supreme Court ruled that was unconstitutional. Congress, you can't delegate. So if you're violating the Constitution, you're violating the Constitution, whether Congress likes it or not.
Look at the prize cases, which involve the capturing of ships coming out of southern ports and the Union taking the goods from those things because they said they were aiding the enemy. That went to court, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically held that the war actually, you didn't need an act of Congress because the war was actually in effect once those shots got fired, and therefore he had the right to do that. So they sustained his action.
And you're
That's the
great,
Supreme
that's great.
Court.
What we're
1863.
telling you was what the people of Maryland believe. You can go back, 20 years later, Supreme Court said this, there, right or wrong. I don't care if he's right or wrong. What I'm telling you is what the people of Maryland believe and what's happened in Maryland. And how do you justify all these violations? You know what the first use of suspension of habeas corpus? Why did they suspend habeas corpus in April? Why Lincoln's first suspension? What was the purpose of it? In April?
It wasn't Merriman?
No, before, right after America, but why did Lincoln? Okay, it's understood that Lincoln's first suspension of habeas was to protect the supply lines between Philadelphia and Washington. When was it first applied? It was first applied against a father who went to court, because my son, who joined the Army in Fort McHenry, is underage, and he didn't have my permission. It's unauthorized. And the Maryland court issued a writ of habeas corpus to bring that boy in. Guess what? The commander of Fort McHenry goes, no, habeas corpus suspended. So what we find is that habeas corpus in Maryland was suspended for anything they wanted it suspended for. So, but no, you were right.
It's a war, and things happen in war.
And we always have.
And Washington and Lincoln was hanging out fighting.
And you're right.
There was nothing there to protect him,
And
so he did what he had to do.
Everyone says that. War is going on, and war is great. There's always wars.
So,
How many wars have we had? And if you want a constitution, the only thing that separates us, hang on, from the Russians, Chinese, is our constitution.
excuse me, where are we going next week? Can we do a quick?
All right, so next week, we're going to talk about the Maryland elections. And we're going to see the elections start with the City Council of Baltimore and going through the election of 1863 and how the federal government manipulated the elections and what happened, how they restorated the polls. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yes, here, yes,
It's probably here.